Maya Johnson walked into the courtroom with her hands shaking just a little bit as she held onto her data tablet that had all the proof she needed to show everyone what was really happening on New Providence Colony. She had been working for 3 whole years to gather everything and make sure it was all correct and true, but nobody seemed to care about what she had to say because she looked different from the people who ran things around here. Her skin was darker than theirs, and she talked with an Earth accent that made the colonial leaders treat her like she did not belong in their world, even though she worked just as hard as anyone else. Judge Harold Pierce sat behind his big wooden desk looking down at Maya like she was wasting his time and making him angry for no good reason at all. He leaned back in his chair and his face showed that he thought Maya was stupid for coming back to his courtroom again, with the same story she had been telling for months now. The other people in the room started whispering to each other, and some of them were laughing quietly because they all thought Maya was crazy for trying to fight against the most powerful people in the colony. Maya took a deep breath and started talking even though her voice was not as strong as she wanted it to be. She told Judge Pierce that she had found proof that Director Craig Hamilton and Police Chief Victor Lang had been stealing money from the colony budget for years and years. The money was supposed to go to the outer settlements where people needed clean water to drink and stay healthy. But instead, the money went into the pockets of Hamilton and Lang and their friends. 330 million credits had disappeared, and Maya could prove exactly where it all went. Lieutenant Greg Morrison was standing at the back of the courtroom wearing his police uniform that was clean and pressed and perfect. When Maya finished talking, he let out a loud laugh that made everyone else start laughing too, because they thought it was funny that this woman kept coming back with her crazy stories about corruption and stolen money. Chief Lang himself was sitting in one of the seats watching everything happen, and he had a big smile on his face like he was enjoying a good show that was being put on just for him. Judge Pierce looked at Maya, and his voice was cold when he spoke to her. He told her that she had made these same accusations many times before, and that the Colonial Bureau had already looked into everything and found nothing wrong at all. He said that Maya should go back to her regular job and stop bothering the court with her complaints that nobody believed anyway. He told her that she was wasting everyone's time and that she should be grateful she was not being punished for making false statements against important government officials. Maya felt her anger rising up inside her chest, and she spoke louder than before. She told the judge that people were dying in the outer settlements because the water was dirty and making them sick. She said that children were getting diseases that could have been prevented if the water purification systems had been fixed like they were supposed to be. She tried to explain that the money that was stolen was the same money that was supposed to save lives, but nobody in the courtroom seemed to care about any of that. The judge hit his wooden hammer down hard on the desk, and the loud bang made Maya stop talking immediately. He told her that if she said one more word, he would find her in contempt of court and put her in jail for disrupting the legal process. Then he said that the hearing was over, and the case was dismissed just like all the other times before. Maya stood there frozen in place as everyone started leaving the courtroom and going back to their normal lives like nothing important had just happened. Chief Lang walked past Maya on his way out, and he stopped right next to her so close that she could smell the tobacco on his breath and feel the heat coming off his body. He leaned down and whispered in her ear so quietly that nobody else could hear what he was saying. He told Maya that she should be very careful because bad things happened to people who did not know when to stop asking questions and making trouble for their betters. Then he walked away, laughing with the other officers who worked for him. Maya stood alone in the empty courtroom, feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from anger instead of nervousness. She had spent 3 years of her life gathering evidence and building a case that should have been impossible to ignore. But somehow these powerful men had made it all disappear, like it never existed. They had laughed at her and threatened her and dismissed her like she was nothing at all. But Maya was not nothing, and she was not going to give up no matter how hard they tried to make her go away. She had grown up in the Detroit reclamation zone back on Earth, where she learned that people in power would take everything from you if you let them. She had seen neighborhoods destroyed and families torn apart by corruption and greed. That was why she left Earth. In the first place, because she thought the colonies would be different and better. But now she knew that humans brought their worst qualities with them wherever they went. She walked out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight of New Providence. The sky was a beautiful blue color, and the air smelled clean and fresh, but Maya knew that in the outer settlements, the air smelled like sickness and death because the water systems were failing. She thought about all the people who were suffering while Craig, Hamilton, and Victor Lang lived in their big houses and threw fancy parties with stolen money. Maya made a decision right there on the courthouse steps. If the legal system would not help her, then she would find another way to bring down Hamilton and his empire of corruption. She did not know exactly how she was going to do it yet, but she knew that she had skills they did not know about and connections they did not suspect. She was a systems analyst, which meant she understood computers and networks better than almost anyone else in the colony. They thought they had won today, but they were wrong. They had no idea what Maya Johnson was capable of when she decided to fight back against injustice. She was going to make them pay for every life they had destroyed and every credit they had stolen. She was going to tear down their 330 million credit empire and make sure everyone knew what they had done. 3 months before Maya stood in that courtroom, being laughed at by police officers and dismissed by a corrupt judge, she had been doing her regular job at the Terraform Division offices just like any other normal day. She was running diagnostic tests on the colony's main computer network because that was part of her job as a systems analyst, and she had to make sure everything was working properly. The tests were supposed to be routine and boring, but something strange showed up on her screen that made her stop and look more carefully at what she was seeing. There was a hidden partition in the computer system that should not have been there at all. Maya had been working with computer networks for more than 10 years, and she knew that hidden partitions were usually created when someone wanted to hide information from other people who might be looking for it. She opened the partition carefully and found files inside that contained financial records for the entire colony administration. These records did not match the official accounts that everyone else could see, and that made Maya very suspicious about what was going on. She spent the next few hours going through the files and comparing them to the official budget reports that were published every month. The numbers were completely different, and the hidden files showed that huge amounts of money were being moved around in ways that made no sense at all. Money that was supposed to go to the outer settlements for water purification and infrastructure repair was being diverted to private accounts and shell companies. That did not seem to do any real work. Maya knew she had found something important and dangerous, so she went to talk to her supervisor, Paul Griffin, who had always been kind to her since she started working at the Terraform Division. Paul was an older man with gray hair who had been working on New Providence for almost 20 years, and he knew how things worked around the colony. When Maya showed him the files she had found, his face went completely pale, like all the blood had drained out of his body. Paul told Maya in a very serious voice that she needed to delete the files immediately and pretend she had never seen them at all. Maya was confused because she thought Paul would be happy that she had found proof of financial fraud, but instead he looked terrified. She asked him why she should delete evidence of a crime, and Paul grabbed her arm, which was something he had never done before in all the time they had worked together. He explained to Maya that Craig Hamilton was the most powerful man in the colony, and that the governor and the judges and the police all did whatever Hamilton told them to do. Paul said that if Maya went after Hamilton with this information, she would end up disappearing just like other people who had asked too many questions before her. Maya asked what other people he was talking about, and Paul pulled up a list on his personal tablet that showed 7 names of people who had gone missing in the last 3 years. All 7 of the missing people had worked in jobs where they might have seen the financial problems that Maya had just discovered. They had all been reported missing under strange circumstances, and the police had never found any of them or figured out what happened to them. Paul believed that Hamilton had made sure those people disappeared permanently, so they could not talk about what they knew. Maya felt cold fear running through her whole body as she realized how dangerous this situation really was. She asked Paul why nobody had done anything to stop Hamilton if they knew he was killing people and stealing money. Paul looked down at the floor and admitted that everyone was too afraid to fight back because Hamilton's network controlled everything, and people who tried to stand up to him did not survive long enough to make a difference. But Maya could not just forget about what she had found, even though she knew it was dangerous. When she was a little girl growing up in Detroit, she had watched criminals and corrupt officials destroy her neighborhood, while good people did nothing because they were scared. She had left Earth to get away from that kind of world and find something better out here in the colonies, but now she was seeing the same evil happening all over again. She started making secret copies of all the financial files and storing them on encrypted drives that she hid in different places around the colony. She documented every single transaction and traced where every credit went so she could prove exactly who was stealing the money and how they were doing it. She built a case that was so strong and complete that nobody would be able to deny the truth once they saw all the evidence she had gathered. Maya knew that she could not keep the information secret forever, because Hamilton's people might find out what she was doing and make her disappear like the others. She decided to take her evidence to the authorities because she believed that if she could just show the right people what was happening, they would have to do something about it. She thought that judges and police were supposed to protect citizens and punish criminals, so surely they would help her once they saw the proof. She was so naive and hopeful back then before she learned that the system itself was corrupted from top to bottom. She went to the police and filed official complaints, and she went to the courts and tried to get arrest warrants for Hamilton and his associates. She gave them copies of all her evidence and explained everything in careful detail. She believed that truth and justice would win in the end because that was what she had been taught to believe when she was young. But instead of helping her, the authorities treated Maya like she was the criminal instead of the victim. They dismissed her evidence and called her a troublemaker who was making false accusations against respected colonial leaders. They told her to stop wasting their time and go back to her job before she got in serious trouble. Some of them laughed at her and others threatened her, but none of them would even look at the proof she had gathered. That was when Maya realized that Paul had been right all along. Hamilton owned the entire system and everyone in it. The judges worked for him, and the police worked for him, and the government officials worked for him. They were all getting paid with stolen money, or they were too scared to stand up against him. Maya was completely alone in her fight against an empire of corruption that had 330 million credits worth of reasons to make sure she failed. After the terrible day in court when Judge Pierce dismissed her case and Chief Lang threatened her, Maya went back to her small apartment in the workers' district feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. She sat on her old couch, staring at the plain white walls and thinking about how impossible her situation had become. Her communication console was showing dozens of messages from friends and coworkers, telling her to give up the investigation and think about her own safety before it was too late. Most of the messages said the same things, over and over again, telling Maya that she could not win against people as powerful as Craig Hamilton and that she should just forget about what she knew and try to live a normal life. Some people said they were worried about her, and some people said she was being stupid and reckless, but all of them wanted her to stop fighting. Maya understood why they felt that way, because they were scared, and they had every right to be scared because Hamilton was dangerous. But there was one message that was different from all the others, and it came from someone Maya had never heard of before. The message said that if Maya wanted real help, she should come to the old maintenance hub in Sector 7 at midnight, and she should come alone. Maya read the message 3 times, trying to decide if it was a trap or if it might actually be someone who wanted to help her fight against Hamilton's empire. Every part of Maya's brain was telling her that going to meet a stranger in an abandoned building in the middle of the night was a terrible idea that would probably get her killed. It could easily be Chief Lang's people setting up an ambush so they could make her disappear, like the 7 other people who had asked too many questions. But Maya also knew that every path forward seemed blocked, and she could not fight Hamilton alone without getting more people on her side. She decided to take the risk because staying safe had not gotten her anywhere, and she was running out of options fast. At 11:30 that night, Maya left her apartment and walked through the dark streets toward Sector 7. The maintenance hub was in an old part of the colony that had been built when the first settlers arrived, but it had been replaced by newer buildings and now nobody used it anymore. Maya made her way through empty corridors with broken lights, and her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She kept expecting Chief Lang's officers to jump out and grab her, but instead she found a group of about 30 people waiting in a large room that was lit up by portable lights they had brought with them. Maya recognized some of the faces from around the colony, including workers from different departments and a few low-level administrators and even one police officer in uniform. They were all looking at her with expressions that mixed hope and fear. Together, a woman with silver hair stepped forward and introduced herself as Linda Hayes. She explained that she used to be a senior accountant for the Colonial Bureau, until she started asking questions about budget, problems, and then Hamilton's people forced her into early retirement. Linda said they could not silence her completely, though, because she kept gathering information and looking for other people who had been hurt by Hamilton's corruption. Maya looked around at all the faces and asked who these people were and why they were here. Linda explained that every person in the room had been hurt by Hamilton's empire in some way. Some of them had lost family members who died in the outer settlements because of contaminated water. Some of them were whistleblowers who had tried to report corruption and been threatened into silence. Some of them were just ordinary citizens who were tired of watching criminals run their colony while good people suffered. Linda told Maya that they had been watching her for months, and she was the first person in years who had the courage to stand up publicly against Hamilton and his network. A young man stepped forward, and Maya saw he was wearing a police uniform with a badge that identified him as Officer Danny Porter. He said he joined the police force because he wanted to help people and protect the colony, but instead he found out he was working for criminals who only cared about money and power. Danny explained that about half the police department was getting paid by Hamilton to look the other way when crimes happened, and the other half was too scared to do anything because they had families to protect. He said he hated going to work every day knowing that he was part of a corrupt system, but he did not know how to fight against it until he heard about what Maya was doing. Maya asked them what they wanted from her and why they had brought her here tonight. Linda smiled, but it was not a happy smile, and she said they wanted to help Maya, but more than that, they needed Maya to help them. She explained that Maya had skills that none of them had because Maya understood computer systems and networks better than anyone else. Linda said that if they were going to take down Hamilton's empire, they needed to do it in a way that could not be covered up or buried like all the other attempts had been. Maya looked around the room at all these ordinary people who had decided they could not stay silent anymore, even though they knew how dangerous it was to fight back. She saw determination in their eyes mixed with fear, and she understood that they were offering her something she did not have before, which was allies in a fight she thought she had to fight alone. She asked them what exactly they had in mind, and Linda started explaining a plan that was ambitious and risky but might actually work if they were careful and lucky. The plan involved exposing Hamilton's corruption in a way that he could not stop or control. They could not rely on the courts or the police to do the right thing, so instead they would have to take their evidence directly to the people and let the citizens of New Providence decide what to do about the criminals who were running their colony. Over the next few weeks, Maya met with her new allies in different secret locations around the colony to avoid being detected by Hamilton's network. They had to be very careful because Chief Lang's officers were watching for any signs of organized resistance. Linda provided insider knowledge about how the colonial bureaucracy worked because she had spent decades working in the system. Danny gave them intelligence about police patrol patterns and which officers could be trusted to help them when the time came. Other people contributed their own pieces of information and resources that would be needed to make the plan work. George Chen was a network technician whose daughter had died from waterborne illness in one of the outer settlements, and he knew how to access communication systems. Patricia Morris worked in the records department, and she could help them verify documents and find additional evidence. Every person brought something valuable to the group, and together they started to believe they might actually have a chance against Hamilton. Maya's role in the plan was the most important and the most difficult because she had to build something that had never been done before on New Providence. She needed to create a computer virus that could access every government system in the colony at the same time and release all the hidden financial records to every personal console and every public display and every communication device that people used. They could not count on the courts or the police to help them, so they had to take the evidence directly to the citizens and let them see the truth with their own eyes. The virus had to be perfect because they would only get one chance to use it. If Maya made any mistakes, then Hamilton's technical people would be able to shut it down before the information could spread to enough people. The virus needed to move faster than Hamilton's people could react, and it needed to lock them out of their own systems so they could not delete the evidence or block the transmissions. Maya spent long nights working on the code while pretending to do her regular job during the day. She had to be very careful not to let anyone at work suspect what she was really doing, because Hamilton had people watching her ever since she started making accusations in court. She wrote the virus in small pieces on different computers, so that nobody would see the whole thing and understand what it was designed to do. Linda provided decades of knowledge about how the colonial bureaucracy worked and which systems were connected to each other. Danny Porter gave them information about police communication networks and security protocols. George Chen helped Maya understand the technical infrastructure and where the weak points were. Every person contributed something that made the virus stronger and more effective. The plan was to launch the virus during the annual Colonial Assembly, which was scheduled to happen in 2 months. That was when representatives from Earth's government would be visiting New Providence to review how well the colony was doing. If they could expose Hamilton's corruption while Earth officials were present, then it would be much harder for Hamilton to bury the scandal and make it disappear like he had done with other problems before. But then Danny brought bad news to one of their secret meetings. He had overheard Chief Lang talking to Director Hamilton about Maya, and they were planning to move against her very soon. The judge had given them authorization to search Maya's home and her office under some made-up probable cause that was completely false. They were going to arrest Maya and put her in jail before she could cause any more trouble for them. Danny said the raid was scheduled to happen tomorrow morning, which meant they were running out of time much faster than they expected. The room erupted with worried conversations as everyone tried to figure out what to do. Linda called for silence and asked Maya if the virus was ready to launch. Maya hesitated because she had been planning to spend another 2 weeks testing the code and making sure it would work perfectly. Launching the virus early could mean missing some systems or leaving vulnerabilities that Hamilton's people could exploit to shut it down. But Maya looked at the faces of all the people who had risked their lives to help her, and she knew they could not wait any longer. She told them the virus was ready enough and they should do it tonight before Hamilton could stop them. They worked out the final details of the timing and coordination. Maya would go to her office at the Terraform Division late at night when the building was mostly empty. She would upload the virus to the main network and set it to activate at 6 o'clock in the morning, during the shift change, when the most people would be checking their consoles. Danny would stand guard to warn her if police were coming. Linda and 2 others would monitor police communications from a nearby location using equipment they had borrowed from George. The virus Maya had created was elegant in its design, even though it was also incredibly dangerous. It would hide inside the regular system maintenance routines that ran every night, so nobody would notice it spreading through the network. It would copy itself to every connected device in the colony, and then wait silently until the exact moment when it was supposed to activate. At 6 in the morning, it would release all the hidden financial records and lock out the administrative controls for 72 hours so nobody could delete or alter the data. Maya had included everything in the data dump, every secret transaction and every piece of evidence she had gathered over 3 years. The records would show exactly how Hamilton and his network had stolen 330 million credits. They would show the payments to corrupt judges and police officers. They would show the deliberate neglect that had killed hundreds of colonists in the outer settlements. The evidence was so overwhelming that nobody would be able to deny what had been happening. That night, Maya sat at her workstation with her fingers moving across the holographic keyboard as fast as she could type. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the building was nearly empty except for a few night shift workers who were in other parts of the facility. Danny Porter stood near the door watching the hallway and listening for any sounds that might mean trouble was coming. The virus upload took longer than Maya expected because it was such a large and complex program. She watched the progress bar creep slowly forward while her heart pounded with anxiety. Linda's voice came through Maya's earpiece telling her that police communications were normal, and there were no signs that they knew what was happening. Maya tried to stay calm and focused on her work, but her hands were shaking a little bit. The upload reached 98% complete, and Maya allowed herself to hope that they were going to make it. Then Linda's voice came through the earpiece again, but this time she sounded urgent and scared. She said a police transport was approaching the Terraform Division building, and Maya needed to get out immediately. Maya looked at the progress bar and saw it was at 99% but not finished yet. Danny whispered urgently from the door that they had to leave right now. Maya told him she needed just 1 more minute to finish the upload. Linda's voice said the police were entering the building and heading toward Maya's floor. The progress bar reached 100%, and Maya hit the final command to activate the virus at the scheduled time. Then she grabbed her bag and ran toward the door where Danny was waiting. Danny led Maya down a back stairwell that the maintenance crews used, and they could hear heavy boots and loud voices echoing through the corridors behind them as the police searched the building looking for her. They ran as fast as they could without making too much noise, and Maya's lungs were burning by the time they reached the ground level. Danny knew about a service entrance that was not well guarded, and they slipped out into the dark streets just as the police reached Maya's office, upstairs. They kept running through the workers, district not stopping or slowing, down until they reached a safe house that Linda's network had prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. Inside, they found the others gathered around multiple screens that were all showing the same countdown timer. 3 hours remained until the virus would activate and release all the evidence to everyone in the colony. Maya and Danny collapsed into chairs trying to catch their breath while the others asked if the upload had worked. Maya pulled out her personal tablet and checked the system remotely using a secure connection that could not be traced back to her location. The virus had embedded itself perfectly throughout the network, and it was invisible to the casual security scans that the colonial government used. The program was ready to execute its instructions. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, and there was nothing Hamilton or his people could do to stop it, even if they somehow discovered it was there. Maya confirmed to everyone that the upload had worked and the virus was in place. The room erupted in quiet celebration, but everyone knew they were not safe yet. They still had to survive the next few hours and then deal with whatever Hamilton would do once he realized what had happened. Linda reminded them that cornered animals were the most dangerous, and Hamilton would be desperate once his crimes were exposed to the whole colony. None of them could sleep, even though they were exhausted from stress and fear. Maya used the time to review all the data one more time, making sure everything was organized and clear, so that ordinary citizens could understand what they were seeing. The evidence showed years of systematic theft and falsified reports and murdered whistleblowers. It showed the deliberate neglect that had caused water purification systems to fail in the outer settlements, where hundreds of people had gotten sick and died. 5:45 in the morning, Maya's console chimed with a notification. She had programmed the virus to send her a final confirmation 15 minutes before activation. Maya announced to the group that they were 15 minutes away from changing everything. Everyone gathered around the screens where they had hacked into several public news feeds so they could watch the reaction unfold across the colony in real time. At exactly 6 o'clock, every screen in New Providence lit up with the same message that said, the truth about the colony's stolen future was about to be revealed. Then the data began flowing to every device and every console and every public display. Citizens who were just waking up and checking their morning messages found themselves looking at detailed financial records that proved their government had been lying to them for years. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, the colony's communication networks were overloaded because so many people were trying to talk about what they were seeing. Citizens who had spent years trusting their government and believing the official reports were now confronted with undeniable proof that they had been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect them and serve their interests. Director Craig Hamilton's personal finances showed a massive fortune that he had accumulated through kickbacks and embezzlement. Chief Victor Lang's records revealed payments he had made to officers who had made whistleblowers disappear permanently. Judge Harold Pierce had accepted bribes to dismiss cases and seal evidence that would have exposed the corruption. The conspiracy involved more than 40 high-ranking officials who had all been getting rich while ordinary colonists suffered. But what made the citizens most angry was the evidence of deliberate negligence. Hamilton and his network had not just stolen money, but they had knowingly allowed settlements to collapse and water systems to fail and people to die. They had done all of this just to maintain their profit margins and keep the stolen credits flowing into their private accounts. Children had died from diseases that could have been prevented, and families had been destroyed while Hamilton threw parties and lived in luxury. In the government district, Hamilton called an emergency meeting in his office, and he was screaming at his technical staff to shut down the transmissions and delete everything. His face was red with rage, and he kept slamming his fist on his desk. The technicians were frantically trying to access the administrative controls, but they could not get past the lockouts that Maya had programmed into the virus. One of the technicians told Hamilton that they were completely frozen out of the system and it would take days to break through the security, maybe even longer. Hamilton turned to Chief Lang, who was standing near the window looking pale and worried. Hamilton ordered Lang to find whoever did this and bring them into custody within the hour. Lang said he already knew it was Maya Johnson, but she had disappeared and his officers were searching the workers' district trying to find her. Hamilton told Lang to search harder and then prepare to implement something. He called Protocol 7. When Hamilton said those words, Lang's face went even more pale, because Protocol 7 was their emergency contingency plan for if their corruption was ever fully exposed. The protocol involved destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses and, if necessary, declaring martial law to control the narrative and prevent people from organizing against them. But Hamilton had badly underestimated how fast the truth would spread once it was released. By noon, there were crowds gathering outside the Colonial Administration building. By evening, those crowds had grown into thousands of angry citizens who were demanding accountability and justice. They carried signs and they chanted slogans, and they refused to leave until Hamilton and his conspirators were arrested and put on trial. The Earth representatives who had arrived for the Colonial Assembly found themselves in the middle of a crisis that nobody had expected. Ambassador Patricia Wells called an emergency session and demanded that Hamilton appear before her to explain the allegations. Hamilton arrived with a team of lawyers and he tried to maintain his composure, but everyone could see that he was rattled and desperate. Ambassador Wells asked Hamilton directly if the allegations were true. Hamilton claimed that it was all a malicious attack by a disgruntled employee named Maya Johnson, and that the data had been manipulated and taken out of context to make him look bad. He said that his lawyers would prove everything was false once they had time to properly investigate. Ambassador Wells listened to Hamilton's explanation with a cold expression on her face that showed she did not believe a single word he was saying. She activated a holographic display that showed samples of the evidence, including documents with Hamilton's own signature on them, authorizing fraudulent transactions and fake budget reports. Wells said that her forensic team had spent the last 6 hours analyzing the data, and they confirmed it was completely authentic and had not been altered or manipulated in any way. The chamber erupted with shouting as colonial representatives and Earth officials argued about what should happen next. Hamilton's lawyers tried to object and delay the proceedings, but Ambassador Wells had the authority to override them. She said that under the Colonial Charter section, 23 Earth authorities had jurisdiction over crimes involving colonial officials when the amounts exceeded 50 million credits. Hamilton's alleged embezzlement of 330 million credits qualified him for Earth jurisdiction, which meant he would be transported back to Earth to stand trial. In the safe house, Maya watched the proceedings being broadcast live across the colony. She felt satisfaction mixed with anxiety because they had successfully exposed the corruption. But Hamilton and his allies were still dangerous and unpredictable. Linda checked her console and brought bad news again. She said that Danny had just reported that Chief Lang had mobilized the police units that were still loyal to him, and they were conducting raids across the workers' district looking for Maya and anyone else who might have helped her. Maya asked how many officers were still following Lang's orders. Linda said maybe 30% of the force was still loyal, while the rest had either joined the protesters outside the government building or stayed home because they did not want to be part of the corruption anymore. Most of the honest officers had not known how deep the conspiracy went, and they were shocked by what the data revealed about their own department. A new message appeared on Maya's screen, and it was from Danny Porter. He said that Hamilton had just authorized Protocol 7, and they were planning to destroy the original evidence servers in the Colonial Administration basement. Hamilton was going to claim that the released data was fabricated by terrorist hackers from Earth, and that the real records had been destroyed in the attack. If they succeeded, then it would be Hamilton's word against Maya's, and he still had influential allies who might believe him. Maya felt her blood turn cold because she had not planned for Hamilton to actually destroy the physical evidence. She had assumed that once the data was public, he would have no choice but to accept defeat. But clearly he was more desperate than she thought. She asked Linda where the servers were located, and Linda said they were in the basement of the Colonial Administration building, which was like a fortress right now with guards everywhere. The group started discussing options, but everything seemed impossible. They could not get into the building to stop Hamilton. And even if they could, they would probably be killed or arrested before they accomplished anything. Maya sat quietly thinking about the problem while the others argued. Then she realized that maybe they did not need to stop Hamilton from destroying the servers. Maybe they could use his desperation against him. Maya explained her new plan to the group. Instead of trying to protect the evidence servers, she would let Hamilton think he was succeeding in destroying them. But she would create a program that recorded everything that happened in the server room, using the facility's own security cameras. If Hamilton destroyed the servers, then they would have video proof that he did it, and that would be destruction of evidence, which was a separate crime that he could not explain away. Linda asked how they would make sure Earth authorities caught Hamilton in the act. Maya said they would send an anonymous tip to Ambassador Wells, telling her exactly when and where the destruction was going to happen. The tip would include enough detail that Wells would have to investigate, and if she found Hamilton actively destroying evidence, then there would be no way for him to claim it was an accident or a technical malfunction. Danny Porter, who had managed to rejoin them after his shift, added another element to the plan. He said he could get a dozen honest officers who were disgusted by the corruption to be in the area when it happened. They would serve as additional witnesses who could not be silenced or paid off. Between the Earth authorities and the honest police officers, there would be too many people for Hamilton to threaten or bribe into keeping quiet. They worked quickly to implement the plan. Maya wrote the surveillance program and uploaded it remotely, using a backdoor she had left in the system. The program piggybacked on the facility's security cameras and started recording everything in the server room. She set it to automatically save multiple copies to different locations, so Hamilton could not delete the footage even if he found it. Then she composed the anonymous message to Ambassador Wells with precise information about Hamilton's plan, including the time and location. The message was, time to arrive 2 hours before Hamilton's planned destruction of the servers, which would give Wells enough time to organize a response but not enough time for Hamilton to hear about it and change his plans. Maya sent the message using an untraceable routing protocol, and then they all settled in to wait and see if the trap would work. At midnight, Maya's console showed movement in the Colonial Administration basement. Hamilton had arrived with Chief Lang and 3 technicians who worked for him. Maya activated the recording program and captured every moment in high-definition video. Hamilton looked angry and desperate as he ordered the technicians to begin deleting everything related to the financial records and to make it look like a system failure caused by external hackers. But just as the technicians started their work, the facility's main doors burst open. Ambassador Wells entered with a full contingent of Earth security forces wearing body armor and carrying weapons. Behind them came Danny Porter, leading a group of 12 honest police officers who had decided they would not let Hamilton destroy evidence and escape justice. The room was suddenly crowded with people, and Hamilton's face went from determination to shock in an instant. Ambassador Wells told Hamilton to step away from the servers because he was under arrest for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. Hamilton tried to argue that Wells had no authority over him because he was a colonial official and this was a colonial matter. Wells pulled up a holographic document showing the relevant section of the colonial charter and explained that Earth authorities had full jurisdiction over his case because of the amount of money involved. Chief Lang reached for his weapon when he realized they were trapped, but he found himself surrounded by officers who had their own weapons already drawn and pointed at him. Even some of his own men who had been loyal to him could see there was no escape from this situation. The evidence was overwhelming, and there were too many witnesses, including Earth officials, who could not be threatened or bribed into silence like the local authorities could have been. Maya watched from the safe house as Hamilton and Lang were led away in restraints with their hands bound behind their backs. The live feed was being broadcast across the entire colony, so everyone could see the powerful men who had seemed untouchable just hours ago, now being arrested like common criminals. There would be no cover-up, and no last-minute escape this time because everything was happening in public view with dozens of witnesses. Linda had tears streaming down her face as she watched the arrests. She said that after all these years of feeling helpless and afraid, it was finally over, and the people who had hurt so many families were going to face justice. But Maya shook her head and said this was not the end, but actually just the beginning. Taking down Hamilton and his conspirators was only the first step, and now they had to make sure the system itself was reformed so this kind of corruption could never happen again. Over the next few days, more arrests followed. As Earth security forces rounded up the other members of Hamilton's network, Judge Harold Pierce was arrested at his home, along with 38 other officials who had been part of the conspiracy. The Colonial Bureau was placed under temporary Earth administration, while investigators went through every department looking for additional evidence and more conspirators. The entire government of New Providence was being dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. Maya came out of hiding once it was safe, and she immediately became the center of attention. News organizations wanted to interview her, and citizens wanted to thank her for exposing the truth. But Maya was uncomfortable with all the attention, because she knew that many other people had helped make this possible. Linda and Danny and George and Patricia and all the others who had risked their lives deserved just as much credit as she did. 3 months after the arrests, Maya found herself standing in a very different courtroom than the one where Judge Pierce had mocked and dismissed her. This was a federal facility back on Earth, filled with prosecutors and defense attorneys and representatives from dozens of colonies who were watching the proceedings carefully. The trials of Craig Hamilton and his co-conspirators had begun, and it was the largest corruption case in colonial history. Hamilton faced 217 separate criminal charges, including embezzlement and murder and conspiracy and destruction of evidence. Victor Lang had 83 charges against him. Judge Pierce and the other conspirators would have their own trials after Hamilton's case was finished. The evidence that Maya had gathered was being presented in careful detail, and nobody could deny what had happened. Maya was called as the primary witness for the prosecution. She walked to the witness stand feeling nervous but also determined to tell the truth clearly, so everyone would understand what Hamilton had done. Unlike her experience in Pierce's courtroom this time, every word she spoke was treated with respect and gravity. The prosecutors asked her detailed questions about how she discovered the hidden financial records and what she did with that information. Maya explained her investigation methodically, walking the court through 3 years of gathering evidence and documenting crimes. She showed the judges and jury members exactly how Hamilton had stolen 330 million credits and how he had used that money to buy influence and silence opposition. She testified about the 7 people who had disappeared after discovering parts of the conspiracy and how the police had never seriously investigated their disappearances. The prosecutor asked Maya what motivated her to continue the investigation, despite all the threats and mockery she faced. Maya thought about the question carefully before answering. She said she grew up watching powerful people destroy communities because nobody stopped them. She explained that she came to the colonies hoping humanity could build something better out in space, but she found the same corruption and cruelty that existed on Earth. She could not accept that, so she decided to fight back. Maya looked directly at Hamilton, who was sitting at the defense table trying to maintain his dignity. She told the court that she wanted Hamilton and everyone like him to know that no one was untouchable, no matter how much money or power they had. She said that eventually the truth always comes out, and people who think they are above the law will be held accountable for their actions. The people in the outer settlements who had died from contaminated water deserved justice, and Maya was determined to get it for them. The trials lasted for weeks as prosecutors presented mountains of evidence and called dozens of witnesses. Hamilton's lawyers tried every legal maneuver they could think of to get the charges dismissed or reduced, but nothing worked because the case against him was too strong. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with their verdict, and when they announced it, the courtroom erupted in applause. Hamilton was found guilty on all 217 counts. The judge sentenced him to 32 years in a federal prison with no possibility of early release. Victor Lang received 25 years for his role in the conspiracy. Judge Pierce was disbarred and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years depending on their level of involvement and the severity of their crimes, but the impact of the trials went far beyond just punishing the guilty individuals. The exposure of Hamilton's empire triggered colonial reform legislation that changed how all human colonies were governed. New oversight bodies were established to monitor colonial finances and prevent corruption. Financial transparency became mandatory with all budget information publicly available for citizens to review. Whistleblower protections were strengthened so people could report crimes without fear of retaliation. Maya Johnson was offered the position of first director of the new Colonial Ethics Commission, which was tasked with investigating corruption and ensuring colonial governments served their citizens honestly. She accepted the job knowing it would be difficult and that there would always be people who tried to cheat the system, but she believed the work was important and worth doing because it might prevent other colonies from suffering the way New Providence had suffered. 1 year after the trials ended, Maya stood at a dedication ceremony in one of the outer settlements that had suffered most under Hamilton's corrupt regime. The settlement looked completely different now compared to when she first saw it during her investigation. New water purification systems hummed quietly in the background, processing clean water for all the residents. The streets had been repaired and new buildings had been constructed, using money that had been recovered from Hamilton's stolen fortune. Children were playing in a park that had been built in the center of the settlement, and they looked healthy and happy. Maya watched them running and laughing, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her work had made their lives better. These children would grow up with clean water and good schools and opportunities that the previous generation never had, because Hamilton had stolen their future. An elderly woman approached Maya with tears in her eyes. The woman's hands were shaking as she reached out to touch Maya's arm. She said her grandson had died from waterborne illness when he was only 6 years old, and she just wanted to thank Maya for making sure his death meant something. The woman said that knowing Hamilton was in prison helped her find some peace after years of grief and anger. Maya hugged the elderly woman and told her she was sorry for not being able to save her grandson. She promised that the new systems they had put in place would make sure no other children suffered the same fate. The woman nodded and wiped away her tears before walking back to join her family. Maya felt the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on her shoulders, but it was a weight she was willing to carry. Linda Hayes walked over to join Maya because she was now serving as Maya's deputy director at the Colonial Ethics Commission. Linda said they had just received word from the Colonial Council about something they wanted to announce at the ceremony. The council had decided to rename this settlement in Maya's honor as recognition for everything she had done to expose the corruption and bring justice to the victims, but Maya shook her head and said she did not want the settlement named after her. She told Linda that this was not about one person becoming famous, but about all the ordinary people who had stood up against an evil system. Maya said the settlement should be called Hope Settlement because hope was what this was really about. Hope that humanity could be better than its worst impulses. Hope that justice could prevail even when it seemed impossible. Hope that ordinary citizens could make a difference when they worked together. Linda smiled and said she would tell the council about Maya's decision. She asked Maya if she had any regrets about how everything had played out. Maya thought about the question for a long moment before answering. She said she regretted that she had not been able to save the people who died before she exposed Hamilton. She wished she had found the evidence sooner, or been more effective at convincing people to listen to her warnings. But overall, Maya did not regret her decision to fight back against the corruption, even though it had been dangerous and frightening. She said that staying silent would have been worse than any of the risks she took because silence allowed evil to continue unchecked. Sometimes doing the right thing required courage and sacrifice, but that was the price of living in a just society. As the sun began to set over New Providence, the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple that looked almost too beautiful to be real. Maya stood watching the sunset and thinking about everything that had changed in the past year. Hamilton's 330 million credit empire had been completely destroyed. The corrupt officials who had enabled him were in prison. New systems were in place to prevent future corruption. The outer settlements were thriving again with clean water and functioning infrastructure. But Maya knew that the battle was never truly over because there would always be people who tried to abuse power for personal gain. Human nature did not change just because they moved to different planets. The same greed and cruelty that existed on Earth had followed humanity into space, and it would continue to exist as long as humans did. That was why the Colonial Ethics Commission was so important, because it provided a check against corruption and gave citizens a way to hold their leaders accountable. Maya thought about her journey from being a systems analyst who discovered hidden files to becoming the director of an organization that oversaw colonial governments across human space. She had been mocked by judges and threatened by police officers and dismissed by people who thought she was crazy for trying to fight against such powerful enemies. But she had refused to give up, and she had found allies who believed in the same principles of justice and accountability. Together, they had proved that even when the system was completely corrupted from top to bottom, it was still possible for ordinary people to make extraordinary changes. They had shown that one person with courage and determination could start a movement that would topple empires built on stolen money and murdered whistleblowers. They had demonstrated that truth was more powerful than lies, even when the liars controlled the courts and the police. Maya's story spread across all the human colonies and inspired other whistleblowers to come forward with evidence of corruption in their own governments. The age of unchecked colonial corruption was ending, not because of new laws or powerful enforcement agencies, but because people like Maya had shown that resistance was possible. Citizens who had been afraid to speak up before now found the courage to demand accountability from their leaders. The real victory was not just getting justice for New Providence, but creating a movement that would echo across human space for generations. Maya had sent a message that would be heard on every colony world and every space station. The message was simple but powerful. The truth will always find a voice, and the powerful will always be held accountable eventually, no matter how much they try to hide their crimes. Maya smiled as she watched the children playing in Hope Settlement. This was why she had fought so hard and risked so much. These children represented the future of humanity among the stars, and they deserved to grow up in a world where justice meant something, and where ordinary people had the power to challenge corruption. They deserved leaders who served the public interest instead of their own greed. The ceremony continued, with speeches from colonial officials and Earth representatives praising the reforms that had been implemented. But Maya was not paying attention to the speeches anymore. She was thinking about all the work that still needed to be done, and all the battles that still needed to be fought. There were other Craig Hamiltons out there on other colonies, doing the same things he had done, and they needed to be stopped. But for tonight, Maya allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment and feel satisfied with what had been accomplished. The empire built on 330 million stolen credits had fallen, and something better was growing in its place. It would not be perfect, because nothing human ever was, but at least now there were people committed to fighting corruption instead of enabling it. Maya Johnson had been just one woman with evidence and determination, but she had changed the course of history for human colonies everywhere. She had proved that humanity's greatest strength was not technology or weapons, but the capacity of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when justice demanded it. And that was a lesson that would shape the future of human civilization among the stars for centuries to come.